I don't think so. On my screen, anyway.
I'm here, Ron. It's Shona.
Hello, doctor. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
There you are on the screen. Okay.
Yeah. And Giselle's here too.
I saw Giselle.
Oh.
I said hi. She probably just ignored me. And, I use my iPad. Oh, I don't get sometimes all of the participants in the same screen. Jim Madison's supposed to be joining us. I don't have him up yet. And
Can you all hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if when I was speaking earlier, no one could hear me or not. I wasn't sure.
Hear you loud and clear now.
Fantastic.
Jack sitting in on this meeting too?
Not really. He's out barbecuing.
Ooh.
It's a nice night for that.
Yeah. Yep. Just came in from his Long Island commute and straight to the grill.
On the ferry boat?
No, he drove. Yeah.
Ron, I don't know if you got the message, but the first application, the 42 Pleasant View, is going to be postponed until our next meeting.
I saw that.
So yeah, so we'll start right in with the Quinnipiac law students.
All right. And since that would have occupied a little bit of time in its own right, I'll wait a couple minutes, if you don't mind, for Tom to join us.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Good evening, Jim.
Hi, Ron. Sorry about that. I didn't think I had the link, but it turned out I did. So
The missing link.
yeah, I have to plug my phone in somewhere. All right.
And I don't see Elliot yet.
I didn't get a confirmation from Elliot, so the only person I think we're definitely waiting on is Tom Burland.
Did we get a no on Ron Bodenson?
Yes, I think he's not able to make it. According to Maria, he wasn't able to make it. Yes, I think Tom is the only one we're really waiting on right now.
I think Maria could keep better tabs of Elliot's attendance, don't you?
Yeah.
You would think so. She called me today on something.
Maria,
It had to do with the project at the Madison Historical Society.
I'll just give it.
Carol should rejoin that board.
Actually, Jim, did you see there's in the source today, the house that's advertised on the last page of our local newspaper has a line that says something like, oh, and because it's not on the National Register, the possibilities are limitless. And that's like, that just makes me so crazy. I can't.
Wait, can I advertise that for my 1976 house when I
That's your opportunities are limitless.
Where's the house?
It's not yet on the historic registry. We'll see.
Yeah, so get it while you can.
Exactly. We've lived here, so it might end up in the historic registry. You never know.
That's
Where's
the one
that?
off of Wildwood, right, Carol? That
Yeah,
was
it's
the
that one.
yellow
It's that yellow, sort of mustard yellow.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like a 18th century house.
Yeah, it's
I've been in that house. It's right around not too far from me.
Yes, it is. So,
Jim, are you selling do you sell maple syrup or do you just give it away? Like if people stop by your house, do they
Yes.
do they leave with like a tub?
No, yeah. Yeah, I sell it.
You sell it, huh? Are you selling it now?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
all year, actually.
And you can buy where you can buy from you directly, but you also sell it at the gift shop at the hotel, right?
Well, actually, yeah, it's actually Peter Loden has it at Walker Loden and
Okay.
the gift shop down there. So, I mean, I'm not selling it there. He buys it from me and then doubles the price.
We'll swing by your house.
Yeah,
Which
so
is
best
why-
to come by your house. Are
Which
you
is
up
why-
about 5 in the morning? Because that's
I
when
am.
I'm heading in. You
I
are,
am.
perfect.
Yeah, usually 5 to 6.
It's wonderful stuff. It's addictive. All right, well,
Well,
listen,
Brian,
we'll
yeah,
let
Tom
Tom,
joined us. I was just gonna,
we'll let Tom catch up. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the May 6th, 2021 meeting of the Madison Planning and Zoning Commission. Tonight, we have a rather short agenda, at least compared to what we've had as of late. The first item of the agenda is application 21-08, 42 Pleasant View Avenue, map 24, lot 223 in the R3 district. The owner applicants are John and Laura Hardy, and it is a lot line revision. And we've been notified by the Hardys that they wish to postpone and present on, is it May 20th, Dave?
yes, May 20th.
So that's not going to be acted upon tonight. Second item is a presentation by Quinnipiac Law School students Alex Main and Alex Sai regarding natural resource inventories entitled Marsh Protection. So with that, I will turn it over, I assume, to.
Yeah, maybe Ron, if we
For a little
could,
background.
I'll give you just a little bit of background is that Attorney Shansky had reached out to me and indicated that she had an environmental law class and that the students would get some benefit from digging a little bit deeper into some topics that might be of interest to the town of Madison. And so we brainstormed some ideas. I think I had forwarded you the couple memorandums that Alex had written. And so I would just like to publicly thank Marjorie for kind of assisting us in this effort, because I think what we've gotten out of it is really worthwhile, and hopefully it's something that we can follow up on. And again, we're recording this, so although we only have a few folks from the Planning and Zoning Commission here, and I see Walter Welsh from the Coastal Resiliency Commission is on as well, I'll make sure to distribute the recording to the remaining members of this commission, as well as the Conservation Commission and the Coastal Resiliency Commission. I know both topics are of extreme importance to those groups. Tidal marsh is something, migration is something we've been talking about at the Coastal Resiliency Commission, and actually the natural resource inventory is a major charge of the Conservation Commission and something they've been working on. So Marjorie, I'd like to give you the opportunity to maybe just do a little bit more of an introduction. I just wanted to say thank you before you do. Oh, you're muted, Marjorie.
Eek. Thank you, Dave. Attorney Marjorie Shansky. I thank you, Dave Anderson, for being so generous with your time and coming to class and speaking with the students and providing a list of topics that the town of Madison has an interest in. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce you to Alex Main and Alex Sahi, who have done this work in your documents and in the law in order to facilitate and assist in issues of interest to you. And so with gratitude for your time this evening, I introduce you to the gentleman.
Good evening, Alex and Alex. Welcome on behalf of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Nice to have you.
Thank you very much. So I'll be starting for us both this evening, and I also want to begin by thanking not only the Planning and Zoning Commission for your time tonight, but also the Coastal Resiliency Commission for those of you in attendance, as well as the Conservation Commission, whose my work and my memo is addressed to, as well as thanking Professor Shansky for providing us with the knowledge to engage in this type of research, as well as Dave for inspiring a lot of the ideas that help to shape our papers. So my name is Alex Main, and I am about to be a third-year law student at Quinnipiac Law, assuming that this presentation goes well and assuming that Professor Shansky doesn't give me a failing grade. But I'm fingers crossed that won't happen. And then Monday, I start my second semester and final semester at Vermont Law School. I'm pursuing a Master of Environmental Law and Policy along with the JD. And as Dave was saying, this assignment was produced for the Land Use Practicum course that we had at Quinnipiac. So I'm really excited to take the law that I learned over the course of the semester and share it with the various commissions in attendance tonight, and hopefully apply that knowledge to help guide Madison towards the right path in creating an effective natural resources inventory. And I want to invite people to feel free to use the raise hand function if you have a question during my presentation. You don't have to wait until the end. Unless you want to, of course, we could address it right on the spot, and I'll have the other Alex take account of the hand, so he'll interrupt me if there's any questions. So with that being said, before I dive into the substance of my presentation, I just want to provide everyone with a brief overview of the research memo and what exactly that is, and the goal of my project. So what a research memo does, and that was included in the materials for tonight, is it centralizes all of the resources that were helpful for me in generating a rough timeline that I recommend that Madison use to create its natural resources inventory. And it's meant to be something that's used as a starting block, meaning that I found a lot of helpful resources, but this just represents this point in time. So as more resources become available, as more work is done completing the NRI, I encourage the various commissions that will be involved with its creation to feel free to amend the document that I gave and to perhaps make a more concrete timeline. And as I'll mention later, my initial goal was to create a detailed step-by-step process towards creating an NRI. And that turned out to be an impossible task just because there are so many factors that will need to be determined by the folks that live in Madison and folks like you guys that serve on commissions in order to create a document that best addresses the needs for your town. So the goal here then is to provide Madison the guideline and some guidance towards going on the right path towards creating an NRI and providing an initial draft of what that NRI completion timeline will look at. And given that this presentation is during a planning and zoning meeting, I've made sure to focus my presentation more so on the collaborative effort that will be involved in creating an NRI. And as you might know, my memo was addressed to the Conservation Commission. So if there's any substantive questions about the memo that I don't touch upon tonight and you see that you have a question on, you could feel free to ask those tonight as well, or send me an email. And I included my email at the bottom of that memo, so you could easily find it to reach out to me. So with that being said, and understanding that I used the resources that are described in my research memo to come up with my timeline, I want to dive into the timeline and describe where everyone in this meeting and in regards to the 3 commissions and the residents of Madison will fit into this process. So I want to first mention that the NRI process, according to many of the helpful resources that I studied, it's an opportunity to work it in with the POCD review meetings that are coming up in Madison in 2023. And while this does seem like it might be a little far away, hopefully after tonight, and I'll describe some of the steps that we're gonna have to take to get there, and that should hopefully make everyone feel comfortable that it's not too much time, but enough time in order to figure out some of these unknowns and create the timeline that I'm talking about. So we'll go ahead and start with the action items that I recommend completing before these POCD review meetings. And primarily, these tasks would fall on the Conservation Commission to either delegate or to perhaps find themselves. But of course, these are things that they would seek your input for. And again, the goal of the NRI is to create a document that best serves Madison's needs. So diving into those unknowns that I've mentioned a couple of times now, the first I want to mention is the approach taken to an NRI. through my research, I found that there's two main approaches that Connecticut towns have taken, both of which have their own merits. The first, which I refer to as a within Madison's borders approach, so within the municipal boundaries approach, inventorying the natural resources, versus the regional approach, which is something that Madison would work with other towns in order to create. And this is a determination that Madison will ultimately have to make for itself. And from some of my environmental science background and environmental law, I tend to lean personally towards the regional approach, just because Madison could do an amazing job inventorying its own natural resources, but that management could be affected by what a town to the north or the east is doing, for example. And if Madison's doing a good job, but the other towns aren't, that could affect something. But for the purposes of getting a natural resources inventory completed, which I know is an important objective for the town, I recommend a progressive approach. Whereas if Madison goes ahead and inventories its own natural resources in its own boundaries, which it seems to have already accomplished a great deal of in its own POCD, and then shares that information with surrounding towns, it'll encourage that regional approach to eventually form. So those are just some things to keep in mind and a decision that I think is best suited for the town to make. In addition to that, choosing an NRI template is also a very important thing to do before actually diving in and creating the NRI. And in my memo, I included two examples of kind of a spectrum, if you will, of NRIs. We have the Ellington, Connecticut NRI, which is on the shorter end, which is around 16 pages. And then we have the Norfolk, Connecticut NRI, which is an astounding 128 pages. So again, I might not recommend diving right into that 128 page NRI, but again, maybe thinking of a progressive approach and starting off small and growing bigger over time, perhaps as that regional approach is taken on. Or Madison could look at these existing NRIs and create a template of its own that works for them. So the goal of this is to stress that Madison has a lot of flexibility in creating its NRIs, but there's definitely good reason to look to existing resources in order to make that determination. And additionally, it might not hurt to contact other planning and zoning commissions or other coastal commissions or other conservation commissions that have succeeded in creating their own NRIs, so that way we could learn the hurdles involved in creating one and hopefully avoid them to allow for a much smoother process. So another thing that I believe should be done before this POCD meeting is distributing a survey that two of my fellow classmates made. Unfortunately, they're not in attendance tonight, but I believe at some point in the future, they'll be given an opportunity to present their survey. And just to summarize my perspective from it, I think it would be helpful to gather some responses before these POCD review meetings to understand which natural resources Madison residents value the most, want to see most in an NRI, and to gauge the appropriate level of participation from the public to make sure that the Conservation Commission isn't overburdened with work and could perhaps delegate some of this to citizens who care about inventorying natural resources within Madison. And as I also mentioned briefly before, I want to stress that creating the Madison NRI doesn't have to be done from scratch. And something that I was really impressed by was in Madison's current POCD, there's already an identification of where natural resources are in the town. Particularly, I'm referring to the conservation and sustainability section. And there's several maps in there that I found quite impressive. And I'm not sure, please feel free to let me know if anyone knows if those maps were created using a GIS system. And if not, that's okay, because it looks like they were created using a GIS system, and that would be a wonderful thing, in that the GIS, the Global Information System, it takes raw tabular data and it converts it into shape files. And that's what's ultimately making the map here. And one of the goals of the Conservation Commission is to take that raw tabular data, meaning that raw data that exists in something like an Excel table, and break it down to report in a natural resources inventory. So it's very likely that this data already exists, and it just needs to get into the hands of the Conservation Commission in order to break it down and to really just explain what it means in the natural resources inventory. And additionally, if it wasn't created using GIS, the Connecticut Deep has a GIS database of natural resources that exist in the state that will have that tabular data included that I highly recommend using. So to summarize these action items that I believe should be completed before the POCD review meeting, it really, a lot of it does fall into the hands of the Conservation Commission, but I highly encourage the other commissions to reach out to the Conservation Commissions if you have a suggestion regarding certain components that you would like to see in a POCD, or if there's a certain way you believe that you can help in the process. And this will ultimately allow the Conservation Commission to first create a presentation of their findings and recommendations that could ultimately be presented at the POCD review meetings. And this ensures that the Conservation Commission will be playing an active role in those meetings. And it'll also allow the NRI process and the POCD to integrate with each other to make sure that there's no conflict and they're both directional documents guiding the town in the direction that it wants to go. So that's really step one. I break it a little bit more down in my memo, but I want to be kind and respect everyone's time this evening. So now we'll dive into step two of what I call during the POCD review meetings. And what really is going to happen here is allowing the Conservation Commission to present its findings based off of those unknowns. And this will allow everyone in a collaborative way to focus on what the town of Madison wants its POC or wants its NRI to look like. And it'll be important for the Conservation Commission during this presentation to make two key findings. First, what information Madison already has in its POCD document, which again seems to be very extensive, and also equally as important, identifying the information that's still needed. And that's where the collaborative process comes into play, where other commissions, perhaps outside of the Conservation Commission, may have the knowledge or the staff or the skill to gather that information and ultimately provide it to the commission, which could also include residents as well, which is why I recommended distributing that survey out before the POCD meeting. And I know one of the questions on that survey, for example, is asking residents if they have a certain natural resource on their property and allowing someone from the Conservation Commission or a volunteer to go to the property and examine the natural resource. So getting that survey out and incorporating those findings into a presentation like this and working with the Conservation Commission to guide the direction of the NRI are just two ways that we can make a collaborative effort even prior to this POCD meeting and ensuring that we have the strongest presentation possible to ultimately set Madison up for success. And that brings me to the third and final step of my timeline, which are the actions to complete after the POCD review meetings. And ultimately determining what information is still needed and the level of volunteerism that's offered to the Conservation Commission will help determine how long it will take them to complete the NRI. And again, that might depend on which path Madison wants to take first, whether it's the shorter municipal bounded NRI or the regional, more complex NRI. And during that time, that's where I would recommend perhaps going back to the research memo and seeing what's there, seeing what other conservation commissions have done, and perhaps amending the rough timeline that I have there to make it more concrete and to make sure that all the commissions are satisfied with the way that it's going to be completed. And my personal view, I think it would be a good idea for the Conservation Commission themselves to still piece the entire document together, because the Connecticut General Statutes does provide them the authority to inventory natural resources, but them gathering the information themselves and being the centerpiece and ultimately putting it in the NRI to produce a final project or final product will ensure that their role is met, and also ensure that everyone's voices are heard who want to be involved in this process. And of course, after the NRI is created, and I know this is reaching into the future, so I'll keep it nice and short, we just want to make sure that it's not a stagnant document, meaning that steps will need to be taken to ensure the accuracy and completeness of the NRI, perhaps expanding it to that regional approach, and then making sure that the follow-up steps are in place to make sure that the document is still accurate and complete. So with that all said, I know that was a lot of information, but we have the 3 steps, all surrounded by the POCD review. I do have it broken down more into my memo, and I'm happy to address any questions now or afterwards using the email at the end of my memo.
Thank you, Alex, very much.
Of course.
Any questions for Alex at this point? Yes, Carol.
Carol.
Alex, I was wondering if it's possible to put together a glossary of terms so that we are all speaking about, especially the different features that are considered natural resources. We all understand, for example, what caught my eye in I did take a look at the survey. I think it was rocks or rocky outcrop, and how does that affect zoning? We have a good example coming right up where there's a project called the Ledges, and so I thought, oh, yeah, is this a natural resource?
Yeah, absolutely. I could definitely pass that along to the students completing the survey. And I also do want to mention that one of my resources in my memo was the Kinetic Sustainable CT. They had a guide towards creating a natural resource inventory. And I think in my memo, I refer to it as a checklist of certain natural resources that Madison could kind of keep on the side and make sure that they're addressing in the NRI. But I do agree it would be very helpful to have definitions of terms that aren't always so easy to come to mind. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Well, Ron, I do notice that Heather Crawford's on as an attendee, who's the chair of our Conservation Commission. So Heather, if you'd like to either jump on video or just talk, raise your hand, and then I can allow you that opportunity. Yeah. Heather, you might need to unmute yourself.
Okay, hi everyone. I apologize. I got in about 10 minutes late because I was frantically driving up from my daughter's band concert. But I was really impressed with what I did here about putting this in terms of the POCD review and everything. The Conservation Commission has been struggling with attempting to put together the natural resource inventory for a decade now. We have 4 or 5 false starts. We have actually a lot of data. We have been constantly using the material that was in the POCD. I'm going to say it was put together with the GIS system. And that material is in the town GIS. And we've also been using, basically, we've been doing a lot of our natural resource analysis for the last 15 years using CT Eco, which is the DEP Yukon database. So we definitely have been using all of that stuff. It's basically been a question of trying to just get a final format. Rather than looking at was it Ellington and Norfolk that you looked at, we were looking at Woodstock, which there's almost entirely online, which we really enjoyed, and Guilford, which is another 127-page monster. But we liked the fact that we looked at the way they were going with coastal resources. So we have so for big background for everybody is that the way what we have been looking at and the different things we've been looking at over the years are the coastal resources, obviously, wetlands and rivers, agricultural areas, recreational areas, the geology was another one, cultural and archaeological, because that was one of our mandates for the town for working on mapping. dark skies, and there's something else, but at the moment it's escaping me. So we've got draft material on all of these. We are putting together introductory, like what is this resource? Where is it located in Madison? I really like the idea, however, of pulling it out more regionally. We've been looking at the idea of doing a watershed management plan through the sustainable CT thing, and we were looking at the Neck River because it is completely within Madison's borders. But it would be, I think, with the resource like the Hammonasset, it would be good to go regional with Clinton and Killingworth for something like that, and with the East River with Guilford. So I'll stop babbling right there. And if any of the other commission members or Alex, if you've got a question for me of what the commission's been working on, I'll be happy to answer that.
Heather, I'll jump in and kind of engage with you a little bit on this too. One thing that I like that Alex, suggested, I think, is utilizing the plan of conservation and development process to help inform the natural resource inventory, which in my mind actually takes a little bit of pressure off the Conservation Commission, because that POCD update process, our current POCD was adopted in November of 2013. So we have until November of 2023 to update, to adopt a new POCD. So I think just making the community aware of what we have now, I think this glossary concept is a really good concept, and this, surveying residents and trying to gather information and make it a priority as part of the POCD process. And then, not worrying, but finalizing the natural resource inventory after that process is maybe completed. It's probably a good course of action, and it's a manageable timeline. It's not tomorrow and it's not a decade from now. I think it's a manageable timeline. So I think the suggestion that we've got is a really good one. And then just for the commission's benefit, my thinking in the longer term is obviously, the POCD is a document that's supposed to guide decision-making, and some of that decision-making needs to be embedded in our zoning regulations. And so, my thinking is that we couple some of these, actions and guidelines in our POCD, along with kind of the on the ground of, where our natural resources are located, and amend our zoning regulations to kind of couple the two. Because, my experience has been typically the most contentious applications, really the thing that is of most concern to people is the natural resources that either surround the property or that are on the property. And so our zoning regulations, and this is not just us, zoning regulations throughout Connecticut, in my mind, the boundaries really weren't drawn based upon any kind of natural resource inventory, and the intensity of uses weren't, arrived at based on natural resource inventory. It was based on either past development or, some other kind of arbitrary geographic boundaries, like a roadway or something like that. So it's just something I think that, we might want to think about progressing towards as we go through these next few years of the POCD update and the natural resource inventory, because I think we'll find ourselves, at a better place if we do that. So I'd encourage some continued dialogue with Alex on this, but I want to say personally, I appreciate the information he's given us. I think it's super helpful. And I think he's arrived at some suggestions that are really easy for us to implement, which is really nice. It's not just a academic exercise. I think he's given us some real practical solutions that we can do. So.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
Alex Krasinski? Alex 1 or Alex 2, do you want to continue? You have more to.
Alex, did you have more to say, or should I start my presentation?
Thank you, everyone, for your feedback. I'm glad I was able to give you some helpful suggestions. And as I said, I'm always a resource, so please feel free to reach out to me as you go through the process if there's any questions.
Thank you, Alex. Very much appreciated. Alex.
Hi, hello,
Alex.
everyone.
How are you?
I'm good. So Like Alex said, I want to thank everyone for being here and allowing me the opportunity to give this presentation and present some of the research I've done throughout the semester. I want to thank the Coastal Resiliency Commission. I would like to thank Dave Anderson for coming to our class and Professor Shansky for all that she's done this semester. And just like Alex, I'm also entering into my third year of law school. As soon as this presentation is done, my second year will be over. And I, like him, am also getting a master's with Vermont law. So that semester starts on Monday. So I'm enjoying a nice 3-day break. And just like his presentation, I want to invite questions throughout the time when I'm speaking. You can just use the raise hand function. And if I miss it, Alex is there to help me catch any misses. But if not, there's also time for questions at the end. So to begin, this project that I did focuses on the current and future protection of tidal marshes by providing areas for the tidal marshes to migrate because they are a vital natural resource. Overall goal of this presentation is to show you just a few ways in which regulations can be updated to further the goal of the protection of this area. This project was not meant to be a comprehensive report on all of the regulatory schemes Madison can use to better protect coastal resources, which are in fact numerous. It is also not meant to be a finalized regulation. It's meant to be used as a model, and collaboration with the board and the residents of Madison is very much encouraged and crucial to the success of protecting tidal wetlands. The presentation will follow the format of my paper, so if you have that, you can follow along. The presentation is broken down into a few sections. I will begin by briefly stating the importance of tidal marshes. Next, I will highlight Madison's statutory authority under the Connecticut General Statutes to regulate the land near wetlands, including tidal marshes. Then I will discuss the first relevant regulatory framework Madison may use, which includes a marsh vegetative buffer or setback requirements, and demonstrate that this is consistent with the Plan of Conservation and Development. After that, I will discuss a second regulatory scheme Madison may use to protect tidal wetlands, and that is the designation of a critical resource overlay zone. And then finally, the last regulatory framework is a hybrid of the first two and highlights how critical resources overlay zones can be combined with setback requirements to further protect tidal wetlands. Tidal wetlands are a critical resource for many reasons. The most familiar form of tidal wetland and a defining feature of Connecticut's shoreline landscape is the coastal salt marsh. These areas are some of the most ecologically diverse and productive ecosystems and provide habitat for numerous species, including a breeding ground for a lot of those same species. Tidal wetlands are also important for the residents of Madison as well. They provide services, including water filtration and cleaning, act as buffers for storms and stormwater surges, act as a buffer to erosion, stabilize the shoreline, and provide a form of carbon sequestration, and can be a major source of recreational activities such as wildlife observation, provide scenic open views, and have a great scientific and educational benefit. Despite the numerous benefits that tidal marshes provide, human actions, both direct and indirect, can adversely impact this vital area. And some of those actions are listed on page 3 of the report. Many of these activities have historically occurred in Connecticut, resulting in the loss or degradation of the majority of tidal wetlands. And as a result, it is even more important to protect the wetlands that remain. This is addressed in Madison's comprehensive coastal resiliency plan, which states that future sea level rise could result in the disappearance of a large percentage of Madison's tidal wetlands unless they can advance as quickly as the rising level. An important tool that I use throughout my research is in the marsh migration is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's model, which is called the Sea Level Affecting Marsh Migration, and I will call it SLAM for the rest of the presentation as shorthand. SLAM's model projects the changes in marsh until 2100 based on various sea level rise factors. This resource helps to visualize impacts of sea level rise and compare timeframes and scenarios. I will now share a PowerPoint showing relevant pictures from SLAM to explore how it can be utilized, explain how the model was created and functions, and then finish by going to SLAM's website to show briefly how it works in real time. So I will share my PowerPoint. And then I'll start the slideshow. So this first picture shows the coastal resources in Madison during the year of 2010. This is the base model for which the rest of the pictures will add on to. A variety of factors affect a tidal marsh's fate, including its elevation relative to the tides, frequency of inundation, salinity of tidal floodwaters, amount of vegetation on the marsh surface, land subsidence, marsh substrate, and the settling rate of suspended sediment on the marsh surface. SLAM considers many of these factors and is widely used to predict the response of marshes in response to sea level rise. So in this picture, the orange areas are irregularly flooded swamp, and as you will see by 2025, all of those irregularly flooded swamps will become coastal marshes, and this is projected for 2025. And on the right hand, you can see the likelihood, and the dark red indicates that the areas in dark red will be 80 to 100% likely coastal marsh and coastal resources by 2025. This is the increase from 2025 to 2055. And then finally, this is the projected coastal marsh for 2100. So while the change in marsh cover may not seem drastic at this scale, an analysis of a marsh when zoomed in shows that the change can in fact be quite drastic. This picture shows a comparison between 2025 and 2100 near a residential neighborhood, according to Google Maps and the Street View, because I am not totally familiar with the area and I'm not from the shore of Connecticut, but at the end of Shoreland Drive that you can see in the PowerPoint is a residential neighborhood. And using a function on the SLAM resource, I was able to measure the change in marsh in only a period of 75 years, which changed approximately 385 feet. This is indeed quite significant, and this is one reason why planning now can help to facilitate the marsh migration and help protect this resource for future generations. So I'll stop sharing and I will share my other screen just to show you the resource that I used throughout a majority of my paper. This is the SLAM model. As you can see, this is the town of Madison, and again, we have the irregularly flooded marshes in orange. We can change the base map. So I used the light gray to sort of highlight where the areas are, but you can also add in the imagery so you can see where all the topographic features are. And so I'll leave it on that for now. It also has a legend where you can see what every color means. And then importantly is the layer list, which I will put off to the side. And it's a little different. Okay, as you can see, so we're at the 2010 starting Landcover classes, and then you can look at the 2025 likelihood, which goes through hundreds of analyses to come up with what the projected coastal marsh situation will be like. And sorry for the lag, my computer's been a little slow today, but as you can see now, the 2025 likelihood has changed. And then you can look at 2055, but I think really important and cool in this model is that you can adjust the layers to how much sea level rise is happening. And so they give generally the 10th percentile is the lowest, and then the 90th percentile is the highest. And it's a vital resource, and it's really interesting, and you can play around with it a lot. And I think showing the change from 2025 to 2100 shows just how much projected coastal marsh there will be. So that's just a brief run through the SLAM model. And next, I will briefly discuss the statutory authority to impose regulations in Madison regarding the protection of marshes. Connecticut has stated its general public policy to preserve marshlands under Connecticut General Statute 22A28. This is also mirrored in the state's Coastal Management Act under 22A92. And finally, Connecticut General Statute 22A103C states that zoning regulations may be revised within the coastal boundary, and Madison can utilize any lawful zoning techniques to achieve the purpose of protection of coastal resources. The list in the statute of zoning methods and techniques that they can use is not comprehensive and allows the town some flexibility in determining new regulations. And that went to more in depth in my paper. I just wanted to highlight briefly that there is a statutory authority to impose these regulations. Next in my research, I looked at Madison's current zoning regulations, and they do provide some form of protection for wetlands and coastal resources. As seen in section 2.17 of the zoning regs, there is a 50-foot required setback from coastal resources required for all buildings. And there are a few sections that reduce this setback requirement, such as area near the East River. And that is all seen in my research paper. So finally.
And Alex, I think you have a question.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, Alex, fantastic research. It's it's really compelling information. I'm wondering, Dave, currently we regulate based on what is wetlands today. Is there any advisory relative to taking a look, particularly in our area, of saying we should be looking, have a 10-year look ahead to really define what a wetland boundary is?
I'll let Alex Sahi, if you have an answer to that question.
Sure, I think that is an excellent idea, and I think that's I think using the SLAM model will help you to do that, and also like the other Alex was saying, a natural resources inventory will also aid in that. And I think that in the regulations, you can put in language where you need to update or amend them every certain years, and you can base those regulations off some of these projected sea level rise and coastal marsh migration patterns.
And I'll add to that just briefly is, I think we could do that, Tom, by if we looked at actually elevation data, and then you can kind of project forwards based on, elevation data from the existing marsh. So there would be a mechanism probably to figure out how to do that fairly. So good question. Jim Madison has a question as well.
Yeah, it's really more of a comment. I think going back to Tom's point about making changes to the boundaries, one of the things that's interesting is if we have a regulation that requires a setback of X number of feet from a boundary, if the boundaries are changed, our regulations should still be valid for protecting the marshes.
Yeah, I guess the other way to look at that though, Jim, is if someone built something 50 feet from a tidal wetland today, 25 years from now, it's no longer going to be 50 feet from a tidal wetland. It could be 30 feet or, what have you, depending on the, the topography. So the question is there a way to, amend our regulations to get ahead of those projections in some
Well, the way we would have to do it then in that case is to look at the projection, and then we would have to say it's no longer 50 feet, it's 75.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, you could do something as simple as that. Is just increase the buffer requirement.
And the only thing with that is that boundary change isn't going to be consistent across the coastal wetlands. You're going to have some areas that are going to get greater inundation, and so that 75 feet might be appropriate because it'd be down to 30 feet. In 10 or 15 years, but there's other places based on that map, and you see the you see the interplay that 25 years from now, 75 feet is still going to be 75 feet.
Right.
So it's one of those that is it the right thing to do to just extend that out when you can do this modeling and have it 50 feet from what the projected wetland would be, in 15 or 25 years or something.
But didn't we also, it's interesting, I believe that we looked at the SLAM model when the proposal for the East River Marina project was before us. And the other thing that's interesting is Alex had shown in one of his PowerPoints, he chose an area that actually had to do with shorelands. And, and we had just been,
That's what prompted my question.
yeah, okay, well, there you go. I mean, and you could see in his example how it did expand quite a bit from
Mhm.
was it the 2010?
Yeah.
So anyway,
Well, and by the way, the 11th, 12th, and then some of the earlier holes are under trouble as well at the Madison Country Club.
yeah, I know. I was looking at that too.
So we do have a couple attendees with their hands raised, and Walter Welsh, I'm going to start with. Walter's on the Coastal Resiliency Commission. So Walter.
Thank you, David, and all of both presentations are wonderful. I'm looking for Alex. I'll call him Alex too. It's a Roman numerals. He's like he just was a royalty of some sort. So the question you can see is that regulatory authority is based on the words title Marsh, and you look at trying to regulate to a map that's fluctuating. So that the marsh is moving, growing, yet there isn't really authority under the general statute to regulate other than what the marsh is today. Is that where we are?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So the question really goes to if the statute says you should do this with the title marsh, right? And this is your regulatory authority. And now, but you can say in 5 years, the marsh is going to be bigger. What authority do I have today to regulate to the future limit? That's the question. I think Marjorie's trying to say something.
I don't want to step on Mr. Sahi's toes here,
But you can step on mine. It's
there
okay.
you go. Your planning authority, because of the nature of a marsh and because of the fact of sea level rise and the beauty of SLAM and its scientific basis, those are all the seeds of good planning.
So you'd be allowed under the statute, or you'd be allowed to adopt a regulation that would in fact be based on future movement of the marsh.
Correct, based on science.
Yeah, we like science is popular in some quarters. Okay, that was the question I had. And then one other question, if you look at marshes in some place in this town, they're titled today and inland or not titled today, but they might become titled later. Do we look at regulating not only for the tidal wetlands, but the inland wetlands under another statute?
Yes, you could look at the inland wetlands under another statute. That's beyond sort of the scope of my project.
Absolutely. I understand, Alex. What you did, by the way, is fantastic. It is a great report. I've read it once and going over it again today. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
We have two other people with their hands raised. Heather Crawford.
Hi. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So in terms of the regulatory authority, my question was, I believe the state of Connecticut passed something within the last couple of years that required towns to use planning, in their assumption in their planning for coastal management of a 50 centimeter or 18-inch sea level rise by the year 2050. Which goes back to Dave's idea that maybe we could do this in terms of topography, because if we just drew a line at that, moved the 50-foot setback back by that topographic line, then we would get past the point of the 75 feet at a bluff versus the 75 feet where there's only a 6-inch elevation change over hundreds of feet. So I just wanted and we've all asking these questions in the middle of your presentation, so I wasn't sure if you actually had that as part of your regulatory overview or not.
No, that's not part of the regulatory overview that I did. I looked more towards the other Connecticut general statutes to regulating the upland area of the marsh and the town's authority to regulate that area. But sorry, Professor Shansky?
Well, if I may, I just want to respond because two statutory regimes have been conflated there. The statutes do provide that the municipality can regulate and should consider sea level rise in its regulation, and in a separate statute, talks about Circa and its requirement to observe NOAA and to adjust its findings every 10 years at least, but there's no direct requirement as to how far a municipality must plan or to what they must regulate. But by looking at both resources, you may draw some conclusions, but it's not an independent obligation to the community. And I beg your pardon, Mr. Sahi, but I wanted to clarify that.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you.
And Alex, we have one more hand raised, so I'll let this one last person ask a question, then we're going to let you get back to your presentation. So Zoe Green, you may.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so I have a question for the first Alex that spoke. Great job, by the way. So I know you touched upon GIS at the beginning of your presentation. Would you be able to elaborate a little more on that? I personally have never heard of that. And if there's any maps online that we can access, like for the public to use or look at.
Sure. I'll do my best to keep it simple. It can get a little complex. So a GIS is a geographic information system. And what it does is it's combining raw data. So we kind of have, it's not called an Excel table, but it kind of looks like a Excel table within the system. And it's used to generate these shapes that ultimately come together to form the map. I know when I took a GIS class back in college, there was certain software that was needed for it. But Alex, on your presentation, I just saw that the SLAM model map seemed to be powered by Esri, which was the company that did the GIS. And I know that the Connecticut Deep GIS database, which I mentioned earlier, does provide free GIS data that could ultimately go into that type of software. But and I think someone else also mentioned that the town has some GIS data.
Yeah,
I'm
so
not sure.
we have some GIS data in our Regional Council of Governments does. So Zoe, if you email me, my email is andersond@madisonct.org. I can email you some links to the GIS information.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at, so I definitely would encourage you to do it.
Yeah, they're great quality maps.
Thank you. Well, Alex, let's let you get back to your presentation, and then folks can ask them additional questions after you're complete.
Sure, thanks. I just have a few more points that I would like to make. Well, the next part of the presentation goes into some of the sample regulatory mechanisms that Madison can use. The first regulatory scheme that we'll look at is the inclusion of vegetated buffers and also setback regulations. Vegetated buffers are important in retaining an undisturbed buffer area adjacent to a tidal wetland and promotes various beneficial services such as stormwater infiltration, pollutant retention, and habitat protection. A lot of the same benefits of the tidal marsh, but in an area next to it. And Madison can do this in a way that is adequate to protect the wetlands from runoff, erosion, construction, other negative impacts which might result from development on the adjacent lands. And in this section, and if you're following along the paper, it's page 12. The sample regulation walks through a model idea of what a regulation for vegetated buffers can be. And again, I want to stress that this is not meant to be a final regulation, and I would encourage you to work in a collaborative method and an iterative process to build the best regulation that works best for Madison. And that could mean, so in the regulations, it's proposed 100-foot vegetated buffers, but it doesn't have to be that. It can start a little lower, it can start a little higher, whatever the commission finds is the best for Madison. So it starts off, a resource protection buffer of 100 feet shall be established along the upland edge of any tidal wetland. The next section goes into uses and activities that are prohibited within the buffer, and there are 10 of them, and it's essentially no building, no land clearing, no development, no new buildings, and etc. And then the next section talks about following uses and activities, although not expressly prohibited, are discouraged within the buffer area, such as the establishment of new lawns or extensive clearing or pruning. The next section shows the uses and activities that are permitted or encouraged within the buffer area. And this is important because it allows the marsh to actually migrate, because like it states, it preserves the existing native vegetation. It encourages removal of invasive species, eliminate mowing of those species, planting native vegetation, and providing passive recreational opportunities to people. So this really allows the marsh to migrate and for you to better regulate that area. And I think importantly, and I bolded it in the paper, is that exceptions may be made only in those instances, where strict adherence would render a parcel unusable. And I think that's a very important piece of this regulation. And then in order to determine, there are also other ways to structure a requirement for vegetated buffers that I researched. I just thought that the first one might work the best for Madison, but I encourage you to explore the other options. The first is requiring a minimum percentage of lot depth be established as a vegetated buffer. This is a pretty flexible option that can be used. The next is use an equation that factors in specific site conditions, such as slope, sorry, I wrote that wrong, existing vegetation type, soil permeability, and upland use. And this is a bit more complex and requires specialized staff training. And another resource that I found, which is not very practical in Connecticut, is that some states grade the wetlands, but in Connecticut we don't do that. But Madison could propose to do that if they thought that that was the best path forward. And this regulation could be adapted into the zoning regulations, but it could also be replaced with setback requirements as well as vegetated buffers. And those setbacks can be made applicable to all properties. And again, it can be an incremental stage. And as new information about sea level rise, climate change, coastal marsh migration is intake by the commission, those regulations can be amended to sort of reflect that change. And this type of regulation is consistent with the Madison Plan of Conservation and Development and the Coastal Resiliency Plan. They both sort of mirror each other in language and state that Madison should continue to monitor and manage activities outside of coastal areas which affect resources within those coastal areas. Next, I'll talk about another step that Madison can take, and that's imposing the designation of a critical resource area overlay zone. Overlay zones are a useful tool to help protect natural resources in critical areas such as tidal marshes. Again, these can be tailored to the needs of the town and done in a collaborative and iterative process. And it helps ensure the best critical resource overlay zone is created this way and under this method. And again, it can be updated and amended as new information is found. And an overlay zone is also consistent with the Plan of Conservation and Development, as the stated goals are to investigate salt marsh dieback and the effect on coastal resources and complete mapping of the coastal resource information. So in the paper, I provided a sample of a critical resource area overlay zone. It's a resource I found on Model Connecticut Planning Regulations, and the one I found for this overlay zone is a conglomerate of Stratford's Waterfront Vision Plan, Westbrook's zoning regulations, Clinton zoning regulations, and in the paper I just put a small sample because it's a pretty extensive regulation, but it states the purpose of the critical area resource zone, and one of the main purposes to preserve and enhance coastal resources. It talks about eligible districts and then the establishment of that coastal resource protection. And it's just one example that can be used, and I put the link in the paper to find where that model regulation is. And then finally, the final regulatory scheme is again, like I said earlier, a hybrid of the two. Once there is a vegetated buffer or increased setback requirements in the Madison regulations, and then a critical resource area overlay zone is utilized, the next step is to increase setback requirements in those critical area zones in limited situations. So I've worked in marshes before. I did a lot of work down on the eastern shore of Maryland, and so I was familiar with those regulations and had a bit of a hard time finding them in Connecticut. So I used a a sample regulation from Maryland, and it can be changed for Madison's purposes if you feel that this is the best method. And Maryland's actually the only state that has a codified minimum setback of 100 feet from coastal resources. And then they've also codified and adopted a regulation requiring a 200-foot minimum setback from tidal water and wetlands in those critical area overlay zones. And that's just another further step that Madison can take to protect these marshes and this critical area. And those are the three regulatory schemes that I sort of overviewed. Again, it's not meant to be comprehensive. It's just meant to be as a tool for you to use and utilize in constructing your own regulations that are the best for you. I provided a small list of additional regulatory actions for tidal marsh protection, which was developed from Madison's Coastal Resiliency Plan and Georgetown's Toolkit for Managed Marsh Retreat, which is listed in the paper. So other regulatory actions include living shorelines, expedited permits for reconstruction after emergency events, flexible development process, transfer of development rights, etc. And then I finally just wanted to mention that the last section in my paper is relevant resources. It is resources that, well, while they didn't make it into my paper, I found very helpful in formulating the ideas of the paper, and I thought that they would be good resources for you as a commission to review and analyze and look at. And with that, I want to thank everyone again and open it up to questions again.
Thank you, Alex. Any questions from anyone? Any hands?
Jim.
Yeah, so as I understand, an overlay zone would essentially be an overriding, a zone that overrides any, you might have 3 or 4 different zones in a big area, development zone, you know, but the overlay zone would essentially have precedence over any of those zones, correct?
Well, from my understanding, it would be sort of superimposed onto those and those base zones,
right?
And it just identifies other special provisions in addition to the underlying base zones.
Right, right. Okay. Okay.
So Alex, I have a question. This one's not an easy one to answer, but I thought it might be interesting to discuss. So obviously a lot of existing development isn't necessarily sensitive to these, tidal marsh areas. And so at what point can you trigger some of these additional requirements in terms of setbacks and buffer areas? And so, obviously if someone demolished their house and wanted to rebuild, I mean, this is, gets into the kind of variance questions. Is that an opportunity for us to make improvements? And so I don't know if you'd had any opportunity to kind of think through kind of I don't want to say imposing, but introducing these requirements for existing development or redevelopment opportunities.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I have thought about it a little bit. I think in the model regulation for the vegetative buffer, any existing structure or building would be fine and could continue to be in existence. I think the important part of some of the regulations I went over is that if you impose a broader vegetative buffer or a setback, say 100, 150 feet, because while sea level rise is happening, it's not happening it's happening rapidly, but I think doing it now allows the slow sort of movement back inland once those, like you said, like a house gets demolished, right? And then if it's within that setback or buffer, it would not be allowed to develop again, and so that would encourage the slow movement and growth inland away from these critical resource areas.
Yeah, I think, you look at that though in relationship to, and Marjorie jump in on this, just in relationship to people's rights to rebuild the footprint that they had, it gets to be a little bit tricky in terms of how we deal with situations like that in the future. So just something to think about.
I see as a little bit of a threshold issue that needs to be agreed upon. with setbacks as they relate to, new development in particular. The timeline we look at, because the inevitability of sea rise by increasing the setbacks and to an extent, and I don't mean this critically, is kicking the can down the road, right? So do we kick the can down the road 10 years, 15, 20? How do we decide what's the proper time frame to anticipate? Because inevitably, unless we go to extreme distances, Long Island Sound is going to come up to the front porch. Any thoughts about that? How that might be dealt with, Alex or Alex? Decided upon? No?
Well, I guess I'll share a thought, Ron. I don't know if this is, anybody else, feel free to jump in. But, when I've listened to the presentations from Circa and their recommendation or their, projections for 20 inches of sea level rise by 2050, because they have a high level of confidence in that scenario. They have less confidence as we go further out into the future. And so I think we would probably want to plan according to those kind of scientific principles of what they feel is a high confidence probability of a situation versus trying to get too far ahead of it. So I think those regulations, and they do serve a purpose at a point in time, and that we constantly are going to need to revisit them and revise them to reflect new information.
That makes sense. Anyone else, Carol?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that because, first of all, a great presentation, both Alex's. But I really appreciated the SLAM modeling options where you can check a range of what might happen. And, it's my understanding that with climate change, the models have been insufficient and that things are happening faster than the earlier models. And so therefore, it's all the more important that we be able to update our own regulations and our own setbacks or whatever, based on hard data, real data, I think, as well as the projections. And I don't see that as a problem, building that into the language that we revisit every 5 or 10 years. And I just also wanted to add, I grew up on a salt marsh, and I've seen, drastic changes that can happen with one storm, not even a hurricane, that, completely change the shoreline overnight. And, again, we have to, I think, be resilient about that and be responsive and stay flexible because they're so dynamic.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, Alex,
Marjorie is going to.
Marjorie Shansky, please.
I simply wanted to say that we're veering into a very important conversation that has to do with pace and distance, and that these are the marsh migration is sort of a point of departure. And the idea for the existing homeowner to, if you were to expand first require the vegetated buffer and then expand the setback, then they're simply going to become non-conforming as to setback. And if they do have the casualty, and depending on whether or not they get over the 50% rule for FEMA compliance, they're going to end up elevating anyway. So if they're committed to being at the perilous waterfront, the regulatory scheme is going to have to be responsive to be protective of them and their neighbors. And then at some point, also through an educational process to make people aware, and perhaps through formation of more vigorous buyout programs by the state or federal government, there'll be some other things that come into the picture. But the point is, as Commissioner Snow says, we can't really wait for any of that to happen. We have to start being responsive now. And so we are very grateful for being able to share my students' work with you, and very grateful for the opportunity to take a situation that a real town is examining in real time and apply their skills and creativity to it. So we are grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. And Alex, let me ask you a question. I know you're bifurcated. You're in Vermont and you're in Hamden going to school. Where do you plan on settling down? I assume there's not many coastal resiliency opportunities in Vermont because they have no coastal property. What are the chances you'll be serving us in Connecticut? I hope they're good. You've impressed all of us very much.
Thank
Are you
you.
Are you from Connecticut?
Yeah, I'm from Wellington.
Okay,
And I'm from
Great
Jersey.
job. Great job, both of you.
terrific job. We really appreciate it. Very informative. And I'm sure we'll be in touch and talking to. And Attorney Shansky, thank you ever so much. Give him A pluses, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
That was very enlightening.
Yeah, no, they did a wonderful job.
So, any comments or thoughts before we move on?
I
Okay,
guess my only comment is at some point we should put this on the agenda again for consideration for actual action. So, maybe we'll get through this next meeting and revisit it for
okay,
another discussion.
great idea. Thanks. All right, the third item on our agenda is a review of a concept by Key Bank for a drive-through ATM at the rear of their building on the Post Road. It's actually Scranton Park area. Is anybody from the bank here?
No, I'm going to review it with you.
Okay.
And so I shared my email correspondence with the individual from Key Bank. So hopefully, if you did look at that, you could see my email was discouraging of the proposed drive-through for several different reasons. But I offered to, share it with the commission as a concept just to get some additional feedback. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware that this is not something that I'm supportive of, to be perfectly honest with you. So this is the Key Bank courtyard, Ashley's Ice Cream, now the Madison Coffee House there, and Grand Pizza. And one of the things I want to say is since the introduction of Grand Pizza's outdoor seating and the Madison Coffee House's outdoor seating, this area has become a very prominent location in the downtown, and not just for people to walk through, but people are actually sitting there and enjoying themselves and having conversations. And I think it's kind of an important part of our downtown. And so Key Bank, I guess, is feeling that they need to have a drive-through ATM or would like to have a drive-through ATM to support their business. Obviously, they can't do it along the Post Road section. They don't have an opportunity for that. So this contemplates the notion of basically removing that entire courtyard to the south and replacing it with a drive-through ATM. So you'll see the vehicles are shown in red. There's a kiosk, taking place on the existing landscaping, and then just to sweeten the pot, they're going to plant a couple trees back in the lighter green. My concern about this is from the initial approval, obviously this is the downtown village district. So from an initial approval standpoint, this courtyard area was seen as an amenity and attractive amenity for downtown and across from this Scranton Memorial gazebo and the whole Stop and Shop Plaza. So I think from a downtown village district standpoint, this wouldn't necessarily be a favorable alternative. There's also the bus, you have Ninetown Transit and the Connecticut bus that pulls directly right across from there. And at times, if anybody's driven through there, the intersection can get a little congested and the bus sits there for quite some time. So if there is an additional point of ingress and egress from vehicles, it could become a little bit challenging to navigate through. Also, just from a pedestrian standpoint, this is a major pedestrian crossing from the Stop and Shop Plaza through the downtown, and this would have a pretty significant impact on that. And so, I stated all that in an email to them. I'm stating it to you just so you hear it from me directly, but I guess I put this on here really to get your reactions. If you feel that I am overstating or incorrect in my opinion, please share that. Or if you feel even more strongly than I feel, please share that as well so I can communicate it back.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, what are our thoughts? we'll mark Dave down as undecided at this point.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, who owns that building and all that land? Is that
So
KeyBank?
KeyBank owns the whole thing. Yep.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, Dave, I mean, Dave, when I saw the picture, I shared your concerns about the cars kind of driving through that area. Just increasing the number of cars going through there and any congestion there, and then taking away the courtyard as well. I mean, I do feel for them. I feel like no one's going into banks these days. So I don't know if is there any other place they could set up an ATM that could be drive through? That would be another option. I guess that's not necessarily for us to figure out, but it'd be nice if there were an alternative to this.
Yeah, there's not an apparent alternative. I mean, I think, I would suggest they explore alternatives as opposed to this solution. But I can't see one on the face of the property. I mean, they're a relatively recent tenant into this property. So the fact that this didn't have a drive-through ATM, it wasn't a surprise. So I'm not aware of that things have changed in which drive-through ATMs are that much more utilized than they've been in the past, but I don't know.
I personally, I think that's this was approved as it sits today. And as Dave points out, I think that little courtyard plaza at the back of the building is a nice amenity that complements the building in that area. And it was approved on that basis. And to lose that, plus, traffic is squirrely there. You have two stop signs over, I guess that would be on the east side. There's a stop sign where that concrete crosswalk stops for traffic heading east. And there's another one for the traffic going west, and people don't see it. They out of towners, I think. It's in an unanticipated location. There's a lot of bad stuff that goes on there, near misses, pedestrians, and as you say, Dave, the buses. I just don't see how this is going to work. And then have them exiting on the east side. It makes a blind spot. You have trucks parked there to unload and do those types of things. I just think this is not a good spot. I agree with Dave completely. Anybody else? No other opinions?
No, I just, so which way are they showing the traffic goes? What's the rotation there? Is
So it would go from the
West
top
to
of
east?
top of the screen would be the entrance, and the bottom of the screen is the exit.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ron, I think I'm in the same camp as you.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would want to go down and just look at it again to see, but probably would agree with you, but I'd like to kind of look at it in person with that in mind
Yeah.
and watch the traffic there.
Nobody else has a thought? Everybody else is neutral?
Oh, sorry, I got a Heather hand raised, but I'm going to stop sharing because I can't manage both things at once. All right, go ahead, Heather.
I just wanted to say that my teenage daughters spend every weekend on that patio area there with the Madison Coffee House thing. And when I was picking one of them up the other day, I watched somebody drive the wrong way down to get into RJ Julia's through that little thing. So I would totally, I would totally agree that the traffic pattern there does not support any additional movement. Thank you.
It is becoming a kids' hangout. That's another issue we have to deal with. They're there all weekend long.
That's a good thing.
Coffee.
That's a
Kids
good.
having fun.
Out in the sun.
I agree with Dave. I think, I don't think it seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
Have they justified why they need it at all, Dave?
No, not to me. They have not. And I'll try to dig in a little deeper. This is my there was at one point a few years ago a proposal on their behalf to basically take down all the trees in the courtyard, which I had to kind of push back against, because it just was a maintenance responsibility they didn't really want. And so,
You know, at one time, this was a local kind of community bank. Now Key is out of, I think, upstate New York, if I remember correctly.
yeah.
And I think the transition in the banking business, as Dr. A pointed out, I mean, look at Bank of America. You know, they have that beautiful building. There hasn't been a person inside that building since March of last year. It's all you know, they don't have a drive-through, by the way. They have a walk. And I might add that Key Bank has a walk-up too, right on the street at the other end of the building. So that's not any different, but it just shows you how much interior banking is, what's become of it.
Maybe Key Bank's solution is to take the Bank of America building, because Guilford Savings Bank is telling me that they're going to that Bank of America is going to close that branch.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think banking is definitely changing. So we'll see. I mean, I haven't stepped in a bank. Honestly, could tell you I've only stepped in a bank, I think, once in my entire life. I just don't have any reason to step in a bank.
Well, I just stepped into Bank of America about 6 months ago to close my safe deposit box. And that's the only time I was in it.
Yeah.
In over a year. I agree. Anyway.
So Jim, since you expressed interest in going out there, I'll wait to give any feedback just because I would like to hear from you too. So if you do get an opportunity to go out there, just shoot me an email, let me know your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll do that. I mean, I'm pretty certain that you know, everybody's view is going to be mine, but I just want to look at it to see. Be sure.
Please do that. Yeah.
Jim just doesn't have anything else to do.
He wants to, you know what? I saw him on a meeting once eating ice cream. So I'm thinking he wants to go get some Ashley's.
Hey, Jim, I think I need to go too.
Yeah, what do you think, Tom? And can we just add this to our expense account for planning?
Yeah, right.
Our fat expense accounts?
It must be maple flavored ice cream.
Maple walnut.
Maple walnut.
My favorite.
And maybe Dave, if you're interested in some more opinions, you could get an email to Elliot and Joe and Joel, and they could check the last 20 minutes of the meeting and, you know, see what we discussed and get their thoughts if you want some more opinions.
Okay, I appreciate that.
We'll leave that with you. Giselle, we haven't heard from you. What do you think? Is she still with us? There she is. Hi, Giselle.
Yeah. About the whole drive-through for Key Bank. So just so that I'm clear, so Key Bank has their location, and then you're saying the courtyard is also owned by Key Bank?
Correct. Yep.
Right.
They own that entire building.
Yeah, I agree. And they own the land where the courtyard is. Is that correct? And they're leasing?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I agree with excessive trafficking. I mean, Madison Coffee House seems to be the study spot for everyone. And, you know, we passed by there, I think it was yesterday, and couldn't believe when you're coming in from, forget what that street is that runs along where Stop and Shop is, the name of that street. You can really see the seating. I mean, it's a lot of outdoor seating out there. I can't imagine, you know, through Stop and Shop traffic, the coffee house and everything else around there to additionally, and then they to additionally have an ATM, but then we also have another ATM, right? Isn't there another bank?
People's United.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's easier access.
I looked at that too, Giselle, and I was thinking about that myself, and it's easier access, and it's directly off of a parking lot instead of an actual travel way, and so it is a little bit of a different situation.
Right. You know, it's almost as if, you know, just piggybacking off of what Dr. Hay mentioned, you know, is there another solution? I would almost say a walk-up ATM would make more sense, because that parking where T-Savvy is, you could almost just, you know, it's not really crowded over there as much. Someone can almost pull up, park, you know, it's probably not the safest because now you got to get out of your car, you know, comfort level. But if they had a walk-up ATM,
Well, they have one
Yeah, they do have one in the
Just
front
put
of
the
the
other-
building.
outside
put
of the
another one in the back. I don't know.
road by the sidewalk. So they have one on the, you know, but
Yeah,
on the-
that's true, on the Boston Post side, yeah. Hmm.
no.
But I
uh,
agree, that would incur
Yeah.
a lot more traffic.
Okay. And Jim, you'll get back to Dave with your opinion after you get a chance to drive by.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else you need on that, Dave, at this moment?
No, I appreciate it. That's it.
Okay. Well, that takes care of the agenda items. I had a couple of things. Number one is I would like to congratulate Gramps Berland, new grandfather as of 3 or 4 days ago.
Oh,
Jackson
congratulations.
Berland is now in the world. So congratulations to you, Tom, and Ellen, and the family.
Thank you, Ron.
I hope your grandson's doing well.
Doing great. Went out for his first walk today.
Terrific. He's walking already.
He's walking already.
This kid's a chip off the old block.
There you go.
Are they close by, Tom? Are they?
Yeah, they're up in Cromwell.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so yeah, exciting news over the weekend.
That's great. Secondly, I wanted to thank the commission for the nice email replies they sent to Mary on her retirement. I sent her a note and thanked her for all she's done. I really didn't have an appreciation of just how much she did over there until I became chairman and had to interact on a little more frequent basis, signing site plans and doing that kind of thing. And she was terrific. And Dave, how long was she with the town?
Close to 26 years, I think.
Yeah. I mean,
Quite
she's
some time.
been a fixture since I've been associated with it, but it's been turned over to capable hands with Maria. But say on tape, thank you, Mary, for all you've done to help us and help the town and enjoy your retirement. And thanks again to you guys for those nice email messages you sent her. So
And you'll probably see her. She enjoys popping in on our meetings still, so she's still going to do that because she likes to keep up with it. So we'll see her.
good. Well,
on-
maybe the next meeting you can invite her in. We can see her face to face and we can all
Sure.
wave goodbye. So
Yeah. Although
Wouldn't
the
do
next
it
meeting we have the
Friday.
ledges on there. She might not want
and I was
to.
going to say, we'll wait till our June planning meeting for that.
Yeah, right.
And thirdly was just, I don't know how closely you've been following all the goings on up in Hartford with some of the zoning legislation. But I learned, if you've been reading about this bill 6611, which recently kind of bubbled to the surface, that talked about Madison potentially having to add as many and possibly in worse circumstances at its own expense, like 1,300 affordable housing units over the next 10 years, new additional affordable housing units. I understand today that didn't make it out of committee. So that's one of the more draconian pieces of legislation that's not going to see the light of day. There are others. Dave, do you have anything that you want to?
No, I did
No.
look at that one. I'm trying to, I can't keep up with it entirely, but I've been trying to look at the key pieces of the legislation, and that one, factored around fair share housing. And so, there'd be an effort to kind of identify the town's fair share, which could be up to, 20% of our existing housing stock. So we have approximately 7,750 units of housing in town. So as Ron stated, 20% of that is about 1,550 fair share units. And the way they described it, depending on the income level of the units, potentially the entire unit would be counted as one fair share unit, and normal affordable housing kind of standards. And for extreme and very low income populations, the bedroom count, the bedroom itself might count as a unit, so you get a little bit of a bonus. But it was interesting because it would require the town to develop a fair share housing plan. And then that plan would actually have to be kind of ratified by the court. So you'd have to get a court order to determine that the plan was in compliance. And then there was all these different opportunities for people to basically sue the town to enforce the provisions of the fair share housing regulations. And
Including,
other
including the
towns-
near, including like the city of New Haven.
including other towns could sue you. So it was really interesting. I mean, I understand, and we all discussed and agree upon the need for affordable housing, but some of the solutions that are being proposed are a little difficult to understand. So that one I was not, I was happy to see not make it out of committee, but I do think that our affordable housing plan committee will hopefully come up with some good solutions for Madison as part of our process, which we're working with the Regional Council of Governments. They're hiring a consultant to assist the towns, and they just selected a consultant actually earlier this week. So I think that's going to be a really good process that'll kick off in earnest with a lot of public dialogue in the next couple of months. So it'll be good.
Terrific. That concludes with what I had to say. Dave, do you have anything?
No, I don't, not tonight. I guess maybe I'll say one thing. There was a slide brought up about Longshore Lane, and it showed, tidal marsh migration on Longshore Lane. I don't have specifics, but as you know, that application was withdrawn, and I've been told that the property has been purchased and not for development purposes. It's been purchased, not necessarily as open space, but with no intention of developing that property. So as soon as I have more information, I'll be able to pass it along to the commission. But I think that one, we're not likely to see that again.
Good. Thanks for that. And there's something missing on your face, Mr. Anderson. Has everybody noticed that?
Yes, my daughter said no more beard, so she won. So yeah, it feels good actually. I feel like I lost like 10 years.
Right,
Well,
you can ride your bike faster.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I'll test that out this weekend. I think it's going to be nice. So
It looks good. Looks good.
It does. Does anybody else have anything they want to mention before we adjourn? If not, I will entertain a motion to do exactly that.
So
I'll move
moved.
to adjourn.
I'll second that. I'll
Jim,
second.
I won't
Aye.
second.
Thomas.
Aye.
Just say we stand in adjournment, and I will see everybody on the 20th when, in all probability, the ledgers will be continued.
thanks, everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks for your time.